Hey everybody, welcome to this next video. Today is Wednesday, July 8th. We are 118 days away from the 2020 elections in November. Obviously the presidential race is going to be of one of the biggest and most important races in U.S. history. And we have a number of very important Senate races. There are 35 seats, as you can see on this map, that are undecided. And about 12 of which you can say will be very, very competitive. As you can see right now, the Democrats have 35 seats to the Republicans 30. Those are the seats that are not up for reelection. As it for the actual Senate map that we're seeing right now, the Democrats have 47 seats and the Republicans have 53. Of course, the Democrats are really sitting on a rental down here in the state of Alabama after Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore in that stunning special election race from a few years back. So if the Democrats want to flip the Senate in this election cycle, they are going to have to flip, in all likelihood, a minimum of 4 seats to do so. And that's if Joe Biden and whoever he decides to pick as his vice presidential candidate win in November. If they lose, the Democrats are going to have to win 5. So that's going to be a tough lift. Even 4 is a little bit of a tough lift, but 5, not going to say it's impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. So let's label some of the safe Republican seats. As we always do, safe, likely, lean, and tilt are the state, how we're going to characterize each state. So Idaho, pretty clear that's not going to go anywhere. Idaho is a state that I think the Democratic Party should just keep a somewhat of an eye on, just because Boise is growing, and this is a state that if one municipality begins to grow at a fast rate, it could change the entire state, but it's just not growing fast enough. Nothing for the Republicans to really worry about here just yet. Same in Wyoming. Don't really have anything to be concerned about there. Ben Sass in Nebraska, he'll be just fine. They'll be fine in Oklahoma as well. Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, he's not going to have any trouble. Arkansas has really shifted to the right ever since 2008. They have nothing to be concerned with there. Tennessee, the Democrats for a while, could be competitive here, but if you saw what happened in 2018, Phil Bredesen was about as likable and popular and electable a Democratic candidate as they could possibly field, and he lost by over 10 points. So for now, I'm going to put that as a safe Republican state. I think that some in the Democratic Party might disagree and say that this is a state the Democrats could still be a little bit competitive in, but I just don't see it, at least in this cycle. In the state of West Virginia, that's about the same. This is a state that Donald Trump carried every single county in. Of course, the Democrats can get very moderate candidates elected here. Jim Justice, the governor, he was a Democrat until he switched parties. And then, of course, Joe Manchin, who's about as conservative a Democrat as there is in all of Congress, for that matter. He did manage to win re-election in 2018 and by about 6 points. And that was very, very big for the Democrats' hopes of flipping the Senate this time. Because as we know, in 2018, the Democrats were much more on defense than they were on offense, and they're much more on offense this time around, as we'll see as we go through this video. State of Kentucky. Now, this one, for a while, I had characterized as a lean, just because Amy McGrath was such a fundraising superstar, and there was a poll from 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks ago that had Amy McGrath actually up by 1 point. And what was worth mentioning is that in that poll, what happened was the voters that were sampled were actually asked if, were actually made aware of the fact that Amy McGrath supported term limits. And upon learning that, it was a poll from RMG Research back at the end of May. It only sampled 500 registered voters, but what happened was the participants in that poll actually then said that they would support Amy McGrath much more. And so that was worth keeping an eye on, but since then, McConnell has won back-to-back polls by 20-point margins, and then you combine McGrath struggling to kind of limp across the finish line against her primary opponent, who received a lot of endorsements right at the end. So for now, still a little bit left. Still, I think Amy McGrath could put up a decent fight. She could probably come away with 42, 43% of the vote. But for right now, I don't really think Mitch McConnell has too much to worry about. And if anything, this is kind of hurting the Democratic Party, seeing as this is a race in which a ton of national fundraising is being devoted to the state, whereas it's not in some of the much more competitive states. And it's pretty clear if Amy McGrath was going to have that much trouble just defeating Charles Booker in the primary, she's not going to take down Mitch McConnell. So Alabama, for now, I'm going to say that's a likely Republican state. Because I think Doug Jones does have some resiliency to him, and he's doing pretty well with his fundraising so far. Tommy Tuberville is a completely unproven candidate, and Jeff Sessions, should he manage to win the primary and contest back for his old seat, it does appear as of now as though Doug Jones would have a better chance defeating Jeff Sessions than he would against Tommy Tuberville. But I do expect Doug Jones to make this a little bit closer than people think. I can imagine Doug Jones is going to pull away with 44-45% of the vote, which would be pretty good for him, considering the state he's in and considering he barely was able to defeat Roy Moore last time around. So for now, unless something changes, I think it's pretty much going to be just fine. But yeah, for right now, Alabama is a likely Republican state. In the state of Mississippi, now Democrats are starting to see some signs in this state. Okay, obviously this is the most minority population state. I know that sounds weird, but a very, very large African American population in the state of Mississippi. And Cindy Hyde-Smith, who was in some hot water during her special election in Mississippi, she won, but she wasn't able to really win in the kind of way that Republicans hoped to win in the state of Mississippi. The final tally there was 54-46, and Mike Espy, who was the losing candidate that day, is running again against her. So it's kind of a rematch in this state. And I think in what could be a Democratic wave year, especially when, I'm not making any sort of political statement here, but in a time when racial tensions across the country, given what's been happening up here, are very, very high, and you've got the very, very high black population in Mississippi, I think you can expect some high turnout, and I think you can expect some enthusiasm on the Democratic side, combined with a deeply unpopular incumbent president who's getting walloped in the national polls and a lot of the state polls as well. So I think Mike Espy is going to be able to put up a pretty good challenge. So I'm actually going to label this as just a lean for the Republicans, because I think come election day, I think Mike Espy is going to be able to put up a pretty good challenge. And I would expect him to get around 47% of the vote. Just given everything that's happened nationally, some of the comments made by the president, and also just the dynamics of this race, a black progressive candidate against a very conservative white candidate. So I think for now, the Republicans might want to pay a little bit more attention and devote a little bit more resources down to the state than they would have otherwise liked to. But for now, this should be fine. South Dakota, Democrats have been able to do a few things here just to kind of keep themselves present in the state, but after the Matt Rushmore speech, everything, not much to discuss here. Trump's going to be just fine in the state of South Dakota. Let's go down to Kansas now. In the state of Kansas, this really depends on the primary that takes place in August. If Chris Kobach becomes the Republican nominee in the state of Kansas, the Democrats then have a chance with Barbara Bollier. If he doesn't, then it's just going to become sort of an ordinary Senate race in Kansas, which the Democrats pretty much have no chance in. Now, the Democrats, of course, shocked the world and won the governorship in the state of Kansas 2 years ago. It was a stunning win for them. Laura Kelly was able to win the governorship there. So it sort of signified that the Democrats can do something in the event that a deeply unpopular candidate such as Chris Kobach is on the ballot. And he is, I think, frustrating the Republican Party by running again, this time for the Senate. And so if he is the nominee, then the Democrats have a chance at this seat. I'm not saying it's likely they'd win it, but they would have a chance at this. If they don't, I say they basically have no shot at it. So right now, given that it's kind of a dead heat in that primary, I'm going to say this is just a likely for the Republicans. Whereas instead of, safe, which you would normally characterize Kansas as being a safe state for the Republicans. Now, I know we're kind of jumping around here, but I'm sort of trying to narrow this down from safe to to likely to lean to all you get the idea. Now in the state of Alaska, down here. Now this is kind of an interesting race because the state of Alaska is a pretty elastic state. No pun intended. Dan Sullivan, the incumbent, is one of the most unknown senators really across the country. There's nothing really about him to gauge. He's not popular, but he's also not unpopular. He's just totally unknown, and it might have something to do with the fact that he's way out here, cut off from the contiguous part of the United States. But the reality is he's just so unknown and has very little national status. And this is also a state that the Democrats can be much more competitive in, kind of like the state of Montana, which we'll get to later, on the state level than they can be sometimes on the national level. And so right now, Al Gross is the independent candidate, of course. He's not actually the Democratic candidate. He is running against Dan Sullivan. He is an independent. He has promised to caucus with the Democrats. And, remember, this is a state that, Mark Begich was able to get elected in, but further helping Al Gross's chances. And I think what was a smart decision of his to run as an independent is, of course, remember Lisa Murkowski. She lost in the Republican primary. She wasn't even the candidate, for goodness sake, and she ended up running as an independent, promised to caucus as a Republican, and here she is again as a senator. So this is also a very difficult state to poll because it's a very low population density. The population is very spread out across the state. It's very difficult to gauge really where this state kind of stands on the political level. So I think Al Gross could have a chance here, kind of in the way that Laura Kelly was able to kind of stun people in Kansas. I think Al Gross, it could just be his night. And in a Democratic wave here, there's been, a decent amount of money devoted to this seat. In a Democratic wave year, as an independent, against a Republican that's very sort of, just kind of inconsequential on most levels, but is, a reliable Republican vote on the Kavanaugh stuff, everything else. Combined with a state in which Lisa Murkowski is sort of, giving voters reason to believe that there's something other than the very conservative government that we're seeing right now, albeit though she is a part of it. I think this right now is just a lean for the Republicans because I think push comes to shove, Dan Sullivan will be fine. But as I said earlier, the ball could just bounce the Democrats away on this one. It's a very difficult state to poll. This state right now, Al Gross could be leading by 20 points and we could have no idea. But because Alaska at heart is a Republican state for now, I'm going to give that as a lean red. So the Republicans have expanded their majority now. It's now 44 to 35. So the Democrats have quite a bit of ground to make up, as we know. So now at this point, we're kind of getting into some of the more contested races, apart from the ones on the East Coast that are going to be pretty easy to determine. So in the state of Delaware, there's not really anything to discuss there. It's pretty safe. New Jersey, Cory Booker, one of the more well-known senators in the country, he's going to be fine. Rhode Island, same thing. Jack Reed, he's going to be just fine. Now, in Massachusetts, this is kind of an interesting development here. Either way, the Democrats are going to be fine, but right now, Ed Markey, who's a respected, reliable Democratic vote, is being just, very, very viciously challenged in the primary by Joe Kennedy. And right now, it looks like Joe Kennedy is going to be ahead of him and might just pull away and win. So either way, I would expect the Democrats to be fine here. Even though this is a state that has, that did elect Scott Brown to the Senate incredibly, that does have a Republican governor right now. But at the end of the day, I don't expect the Democrats to have any problems here, regardless of who the candidate is. That's going to be a safe seat. So they pick up 4 more seats there. In the state of Illinois, Dick Durbin, he's going to be fine. The state of Illinois, of course, elected Mark Kirk, and then was able to replace a Republican governor with J.B. Pritzker. So Republicans can at least get something done here from time to time, but for now, there's nothing to really discuss in terms of this being, kind of leaning one way or another. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go west to east because these are what we've reached now is the point where these are actually pretty contested races that could be, a little bit unnerving for either party. So in the state of Oregon, this is, I would still probably characterize this as a safe state. Jeff Merkley is a popular senator, a well-known senator. Um, in the state of Oregon, Republicans, obviously in the eastern portion of the state, can be a little competitive. But this is also, to be, with all things considered, even though I imagine this is going to be a safe hold for the Democrats, this is kind of an inconvenience for them in this cycle because they have a lot of states that they're pursuing: Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Iowa, Maine, North Carolina, Georgia, and defending in Minnesota and Michigan and New Hampshire. And meanwhile, they have a state like this in Oregon where they really don't have that much to worry about, but it's just enough to worry about to where they actually have to devote some money and take away some resources from other states. So for right now, I think I'm going to still label that though as safe. Jeff Merkley is going to be fine. So here we go. Now in Arizona, this is the first big one of the evening. This is, of course, a Republican incumbent that we're dealing with here, Martha McSally, who lost her election bid to Kyrsten Sinema. She lost that race. This was a big flip for the Democrats because if you remember back in 2018, the Democratic Party, having already been in the minority in the Senate, lost 4 different elections in Florida, Missouri, Indiana, and North Dakota. But they were really in trouble, seeing it was all the way down to 55-45, which is not a good position to be in on the Senate level. But they were able to recover a little bit and flip in the state of Nevada and flip in the state of Arizona, and of course they already had one in Alabama. So that managed to get it back to 53-47. And then they lost the special election in Mississippi. So for the Democrats, rather for the Republicans, they have not helped themselves in this race. Doug Ducey, the governor, for whatever reason, appointed Martha McSally to replace Jeff Flake. That I don't think was the smartest thing to do. Obviously, this state has seen a lot of turnover on the Senate level. John McCain, of course, passed away. Jeff Flake retired. Jon Kyl re-retired. And then Kyrsten Sinema came in and won her race against Martha McSally, who the Republicans have pegged to be the candidate this time around. And if you just look, at where this race currently stands, I mean, there's virtually no reason that the Democratic Party should not be overwhelmingly confident in this race. Okay, let's just go through the last, however many polls. Kelly +7, Kelly +7, Kelly +9, Kelly -4, actually, one in Gravis. But then Kelly +15, Kelly +9, Kelly +9, Kelly +13, Kelly +10, Kelly +13, Kelly +9, Kelly +3, Kelly +6. Kelly +12, Kelly +7, -2, +5, +7, +4. It's dating all the way back to January. So pretty clearly, Mark Kelly is the overwhelming favorite to defeat Martha McSally, who is deeply unpopular in this state, who's also very unknown in this state, who votes along party lines a vast majority of the time. And this is, as we know, a Democratic wave year. So incredibly, I'm not even going to put this as a lean. I'm labeling this as a likely Democratic pickup for the Democrats, which is huge because, as we know, as we've outlined earlier, they need a minimum of 4, possibly 5 seats. Okay, so they're going to pick up Arizona in this model, which is big for them. So assuming, well, given that they've already lost in Alabama, they're down to 46. They pick it right back up in the state of Arizona. They're up to 47. Now let's go to New Mexico first. Actually, Ben Ray Lujan here is the candidate. This state has been a very, very good sign for the Democrats, as it used to kind of be swingy, but the Democrats would usually just pull it away. Now it's not even really a swing state. The Democrats are really able to just keep this in their corner very comfortably, which is a good sign as sort of a bellwether for this portion of the country. As we've seen, Arizona is rapidly shifting leftward as it looks more and more apparent as though the Democrats are going to have both Senate seats from this state for the first time in decades, and they're at least favored to win it on the presidential level. Of course, they're in the same position. In fact, they're in an even better position in Nevada, as they have both Senate seats, as they were able to they were able to oust Dean Heller and replace him with Jackie Rosen in 2018, and they were able to flip the governorship. Steve Sisolak won here, so they went they're going to go 4 for 4 this time, having the governorship, both senators, and in all likelihood, the president is going to the presidential candidate Joe Biden is going to win this state. So. Utah, they still don't really have much of a chance there. But in the state of Colorado, Cory Gardner, the incumbent, who votes along party lines 90% of the time, is facing off against former governor John Hickenlooper. The Democrats secured the best possible candidate that they could for this race. John Hickenlooper was their #1 recruit. Of course, he, kind of flamed out pretty quickly after a short-lived presidential run. But he is the best possible candidate they could have. Very liked, very popular governor, more conservative than most Democrats, in this portion of the country. Over here, though, John Hickenlooper is extremely well liked now. For a minute there, it looked like he had some trouble defeating Andrew Romanoff in the primary, although he was able to pull away by a pretty comfortable margin. Part of that, of course, had to do with his recent stumbles, given that there was a rather racially insensitive comment that was unearthed from his past and an ethics violation. I think it was multiple ethics violations that he was fined for as governor. So those two things did not help John Hickenlooper out, and that's gave kind of the Democratic Party kind of a headache, seeing as first of all, even though he's the overwhelming favorite in the state, there hasn't been very much polling at all given in this state. Now, maybe that's just because pollsters don't really feel they actually need to sample this state that much, but it is interesting how there's been such little information. Now, there was one back from July 1st that had Hickenlooper up by 11 points on Gardner, but the only other information we have had Hickenlooper up by 18 points in the beginning of May, another one up by 17 points, and then way back from October of last year, Hickenlooper was up by 11. With that said, with such little polling data, the reality is the primary gave the Democrats kind of a sigh of relief, as it does appear as though he's kind of back on his feet and is still the overwhelming favorite. Furthermore, given where this state has gone and shifted and where things are nationally in a Democratic wave here, I think Andrew Romanoff even would have won in this state. So to be honest, Cory Gardner's going down either way. Even amazingly, even though he's the incumbent, this is going to be a safe Democratic pickup. And so that gives the Democrats 2 pickups there. It's 2 flips in Arizona and Colorado. Of course, it's a net of 1 given Alabama. So now they're up to 44, but as we said earlier, in all likelihood, 48. So the Republican majority is being threatened now. So now it's 44 to 44. The Democrats have flipped 2 seats here. The Republicans have flipped 1. Let's go up to Montana. This is one of the most compelling races of the entire cycle. Steve Bullock, the governor of this state, is running against Steve Daines, the incumbent. Steve Daines, of course, was once the congressman that represented this state. And now Steve Bullock is challenging him. Steve Bullock famously jumped into this race at the very last minute, just minutes before the filing deadline. He is a very, very liked governor in this state. It was pretty interesting how in 2016, Trump won this state by 20 plus points. And Steve Bullock was able to win re-election. That's amazing. That's a lot of split ticket voters. Now, the fact that you have a lot of sort of wealthier California types that own second homes up here in Montana, who can contribute to those races, but also just given that this is a state that has a long history of electing Democrats. Max Baucus was a Democratic senator for over 30 years in the state of Montana. And of course, now there's a hotly contested gubernatorial race here between Mike Cooney and Greg Gianforte. So right now, this is also, like Alaska, a very difficult state to poll. But right when Steve Bullock announced his candidacy, There was an early poll that was done. Let me pull up the source here. There was an early poll that was done that had Steve Bullock ahead by 7 points. This is back on May 5th. There was a Montana State University, also in conjunction with the University of Denver, that had Bullock up by 7 points. Now, that was posted on May 5th on 5:38, but it was actually held between April 10th and 27th. And then another one from the middle of June had Bullock up by 4, and a slightly larger sample size. So with that in mind, combined with the fact that Steve Bullock announced his fundraising totals from the month of June, which totaled almost $8 million in this state. Of course, this is a state that the Republicans have already booked $10 million in ads for because they know this is a tough one for them. They're getting a very steep, stern rather, challenge from Steve Bullock. And right now, because it's such a Democratic wave year on both the state and national level, and Steve Bullock is so popular and has the polling edge, I'm going to say this is a tilt Democrat right now, which is an incredible result for them. This is a huge flip for the Democrats. If they want to flip the Senate this time around, this is going to be a crucial state for them to do it in. And so here we are suddenly in the state of Arizona and Montana, two states that Donald Trump won in 2016. Both of these states now have both of their senators are Democrats. And so that now gives the Democrats 3 flips, a net of 2, pushing them to 45 to 44. Now, in the state of Texas, unfortunately for the Democrats, this is not really the race for them. Even though this is a state that the Republicans are seeing dire warning signs in. This is a state that is shifting every single day. More and more demographic shifts are favoring the Democratic Party. Even in the safest of years for the Republican Party, this was a state that the Democrats could capture 44% of the vote in. So there already wasn't, that much of a margin for a big demographic shift in this state for the Republican Party. Of course, Beto O'Rourke came very close in this state, lost by less than 2 points against Ted Cruz. Lupe Valdez, her gubernatorial race wasn't as close, and neither was the presidential race, even though Hillary Clinton was able to get around, I think it was 44-45%, somewhere in there. Now, there have been polls that have showed Joe Biden actually ahead. Most of the polls show Trump narrowly ahead. But just the fact that this is even considered a competitive state on any level shows that the Republican Party, basically has no chance of winning on the presidential level without the state of Texas and its 38 electoral votes. But on the Senate level, this time around, MJ Hager is in all likelihood going to be the candidate. There is still a primary next Tuesday between her and Royce West to settle that, but in all likelihood, she will be the candidate facing off against John Cornyn, who's not very popular, but he's not as unpopular as Ted Cruz, and most polls have Cornyn comfortably ahead by around 9 to 10 points. So for now, I'm going to say this is a likely Republican state just because this isn't yet the race for the Democrats. They need, I think they can first potentially get a presidential flip here, which would sort of signal a turning point in U.S. elections. State of Minnesota, Tina Smith, she's probably going to be fine. This is a state that kind of shocked everybody in 2016 when Trump only lost it by a little over 1 point to Hillary Clinton. But Amy Klobuchar, Tina Smith herself, and Governor Tim Walz all went 3 for 3 in the midterms. And again, everything that's been happening in this state, given what happened in Minneapolis and the racial tensions in a Democratic waiver, Tina Smith's going to be just fine. I'll still put it likely just because she's relatively new to Congress and, the Republicans do have a good presence in this state, but it's not going to be enough to unseat Tina Smith. So the Democrats edge ahead again, 46 to 45. Now, here's a really exciting new race to watch here in the state of Iowa. Joni Ernst, who was sort of being heralded as like a new rising star within the party, she's not really panning out that way. She's kind of remained, she's remained, kind of on the outside looking in on many of the big national stories that we've seen come out of the Senate. Um, and so, Teresa Greenfield is sort of a generic candidate that is chasing her, but that's kind of what the Democrats need, because Iowa is not there. There's not a very big minority population in the state of Iowa. So, a very progressive black candidate wouldn't really do that much for the Democrats here. So Teresa Greenfield is, I think a pretty good test so far. And actually, the Democrats have won. Teresa Greenfield has 4 straight polls against Joni Ernst. Now they're all very close, but they've won 4 in a row. Okay, and the fifth one that they didn't win was a tie, even at 47-47. So the Democrats are ahead right now in this state. And I think the Republicans are having to throw a lot of money suddenly into this race. This was a race I think they expected to be competitive, but probably still edge out right now. But right now, the Democrats are doing pretty well in this state. Teresa Greenfield is raising money very well, similarly to Steve Bullock and to Cal Cunningham in North Carolina. And I think as a result, she has a pretty good chance to win this seat. And again, in a wave year, Joni Ernst is not a very popular senator. She's sort of seen as somebody who not necessarily failed Iowans, but as somebody who has sort of been a little bit of a disappointment, given that people considered her to be sort of a woman from, the Plain States, kind of similar to Deb Fischer for the Republicans, which is, kind of a rarity these days. But that hasn't really panned out, her reaching the national stage in that sense. So right now, amazingly, I'm going to give that as a tilt Democrat. And that basically, a few other things have to break the Democrats' way, but that basically right now kind of seals the Republican Party's fate on the Senate level, because the Democrats are already up to 47. They've now flipped 4 seats, and again, from what we were talking about earlier, um, they needed to flip 4, given that they lost in Alabama. So, given what they've done in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, and Iowa, that basically gives them the edge. Sitting as they're already at 50, and there are already some other states that are probably going to lean their way. One of them is Michigan. John James put up a pretty good test against Debbie Stabenow in 2018, but came up short by about 4 or 5 points or so. He's running again, this time against Gary Peters, who's not as well known nationally, but remarkably is outperforming Debbie Stabenow and is even outperforming Joe Biden on the presidential level in this state. And, this was the closest of the 3 Rust Belt states. This state, in 2016, this state went to Donald Trump, Michigan, that is, by only 2.27%. So there's basically no, margin for error here for the Republicans. And so I'm going to give Gary Peters a likely characterization here, as he's ahead in most polls by double digits. Now let's go down here to Georgia. In the general election, I think Jon Ossoff has a chance. Now, this was a little disappointing for the Democrats, because in 2018, Stacey Abrams was a very, very big, popular, exciting candidate for them. That's not really the case this time. Of course, Jon Ossoff, he was the losing candidate in the most expensive House race in U.S. history. It was kind of the first election of any magnitude after Trump's win in 2016, and so it was, the Democrats were hoping that they could, the Democrats were hoping that they could sort of, signify that they were back in business a little bit. And of course, they ended up losing that race. It was close, but they lost. Ossoff again is running for the Senate. There was one poll recently that had him 1 point ahead of David Perdue, the incumbent, and then more recently than that, one that had him trailing by 3 points. So I think as of now, the Democrats have a chance here. But again, not a political statement, but it is just a fact that this state is kind of notorious for not having their stuff together when it comes to voter registration and voter suppression, and actually properly executing the voting tabulation, as we saw in the primaries a few weeks back. So as of now, I'm going to give this as a lean Republican. I don't think David Perdue should be too concerned just yet, but as of now, that's still very much a race. Now, in the special election, Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler are, in fact, right now look like they're going to be the two candidates that end up going to a runoff, given this is a special election. Now, I don't expect that to happen. I would expect uh, Raphael Warnock, the Reverend, to actually get past Kelly Loeffler and go with Doug Collins to a runoff. I don't expect it to be a two Republican race runoff. I do think Warnock will be able to finish in second in the big general pool race. But I don't think he's going to be able to defeat Doug Collins. I would expect Doug Collins to win like 54-46, somewhere in that range. So because this is the special seat, I'm going to label that as likely Republicans. South Carolina, kind of an interesting state because um, Lindsey Graham, obviously one of the most nationally known senators in what is still a red state, even though it's shifting a little bit. A big minority population here, of course. Jim Clyburn, Joe Cunningham were able to easily get reelected. Not in the case of Joe Cunningham, but Henry McMaster, of course, the governor, had a tough race on the gubernatorial level. Won, his seat back 54-46. So the Republicans have plenty of money to spend and work to do to keep themselves in position here in South Carolina. Jamie Harrison has been a fundraising superstar. He continues to do this at a very high level. Of course, there was all that, national media noise after he tied with Lindsey Graham in one poll, 42-42. I don't expect Jamie Harrison to be able to win this seat. Now, while it's great that the Democrats are able to field very good candidates against, big establishment Republicans, just as it would be the other way around. The reality is this could be hurting the party because, as we said, MJ Hager is raising quite a bit of money down here. Amy McGrath is raising a ton of money here, and Harrison's raising a ton of money here. And you can wonder if the Democrats just diverted a little bit more of that money into Iowa and Montana and Arizona, they'd be in a better position, and of course Georgia, to lock those states down. Of course, in this model, I have them narrowly winning in these two, but. So in South Carolina, just because Jamie Harrison is a very good candidate and is raising money at an extremely high level, and Lindsey Graham isn't very popular, I'm going to just for now call that a lean, but don't read too much into that. I think Lindsey Graham is going to be just fine. There needs to be more polling until then, but just because of the fundraising totals and the national energy that we're seeing right now on the Democratic side, I'm going to label that as a lean. Now, here is one of two more very, very hotly contested races in the United States Senate this time around. North Carolina, Thom Tillis, the first-time incumbent against Cal Cunningham. Now, unlike the state of Iowa, Cal Cunningham is not really the ideal candidate in this race, even though he won the primary comfortably and all that. Just because North Carolina has a very, very high percentage Black population, very high minority population. And so that would go a long way for them. Now, of course, they have shown that they can elect Democrats who are not, Black or not deeply progressive. Kay Hagan, John Edwards, and of course, one of the most popular governors in the entire country, Roy Cooper, who is, of course, a Democratic governor from North Carolina. So Cal Cunningham at least fits that bill from a consistency standpoint. Most polls have Cunningham ahead. But not by very much. And a few, Thom Tillis has been able to win some. But interestingly enough, the ones that Cal Cunningham wins, he wins by a larger margin than the ones Thom Tillis wins. So if you look, at recent polling, Cunningham won a Change Research poll by 10 points back at the end of June. Another one that had him tied. Cunningham by 2, Cunningham by 3, Cunningham by 9, Cunningham by 4, Tillis plus 1, Cunningham plus 2, Tillis plus 2, Cunningham plus 2, Cunningham plus 2, Tillis plus 1, dating all the way back to May. So you can tell this is a dead heat race. And the Republican Party is very concerned about this seat. And I think right now, Roy Cooper is on the ballot. And that's going to help the Democrats. There are also two seats in the southern portion of the state on the House level that the Democrats have a good chance of flipping. And so as a result, I think the general ballot is very favorable to the Democrats. And with that in mind, it's a little bizarre to see all these swing states tilting blue right now, but I'm going to say it's a tilt Democratic state. He's ahead in the polls. There's a lot of money being thrown into this race. And, you know, that basically means that, I think Cunningham has the edge right now. Tillis could do fine here. He could survive. But even if he were to, he's going to win by only about a point or so. And so that's the final nail in the coffin in terms of who's going to win the majority. This is now 5 flips for the Democrats, and assuming they just hang on to a safe state here in Virginia, maybe not totally safe, but Mark Warner is a very liked senator. There's no reason to believe the Republicans really have a chance to flip this state. This is going to be safe, and there it is. That's number 50 with 2 states undecided, and of course the presidential race undecided. So the Republicans have to win both of these seats and the vice presidency to maintain a majority here. Now in New Hampshire, this was a state that I think the Republicans kind of blew it in. Even though Jeanne Shaheen is very popular and liked and established in this state and known nationally, the reality is Chris Sununu, the Republican governor from New Hampshire, if he had run, I think he could have defeated Jeanne Shaheen. And of course, remember, this is a state that Maggie Hassan won her race by 0.1% in. And of course, this was the closest state on the presidential level in 2016. Hillary Clinton won by just 2,000 votes. But the reality is on the presidential level, Joe Biden's way ahead in this state, and there hasn't been much polling in this state, probably again just because I'm not sure how needed it is. Jeanne Shaheen is doing fine. There's no high profile Republican that is really going to be challenging her, and it's a swing state that kind of tilts leftward. Jeanne Shaheen, I mean, there's been little polling that was done in February that had her up by 3 and by 5. And then you're all the way back into February again. One that had her up by 24 points on a candidate who didn't even become the nominee. But yeah, clearly she's considerably ahead. She's going to be just fine. And there was even a poll done that had her against Chris Sununu, and she even won that poll. So I'm going to say that's a likely, and there it is. That's the majority, 51. Now in the state of Maine, this is the last of the sort of 6, hotly contested ones: Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine. Susan Collins is the most unpopular senator in the country. She is facing a stiff challenge from Sarah Gideon, who is the Democratic Speaker of the House in the state of Maine. Joe Biden is outperforming Hillary Clinton in this state on the presidential level. The Democrats are raising a lot of money and doing so very well. And ever since her vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, the Democrats have been targeting her with all their might. Now, recent polling has actually shown some good signs for Susan Collins. There was one that had her up by 8 points that was done from June 20th to 24th. That was only 600 voters by a pollster called More Information. I'm not really sure of what their grade is on 558. But, there was one that had Gideon up by 9 points, Gideon by 4 points, Gideon by 1 point. There was one strangely from September of last year that had Susan Collins by 17 points. But then the Democrats got some much needed good news in the state when they saw that Joe Biden was leading by 11 points and that Gideon was winning in a public policy polling poll that sampled over 1,000 voters at the beginning of July that had her up by 4 points. So, as it is with pretty much all of these competitive states, I'm going to give that as a tilt to the Democrats because I think this is, a high energy year for them. And I mean, this is a slam dunk for them. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen. I'm not saying they're going to go 6 for 6 like this in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Iowa, North Carolina, and Maine. But I do think that they are going to be able to flip at least 4 of them in all likelihood. And again, the polling suggests, and all the energy that we're seeing with fundraising and the national polls, everything like that, the generic ballots, has the Democrats in a very, very optimal position right now with under 120 days to go until the election. And of course, they're doing even better on the presidential level. And so that means that they're going to have the vice presidency as well. So under this model, the Democrats would be able to flip the Senate by flipping 6 seats and losing one down here in Alabama, to give them a majority of 52 to 48. Once again, they flip Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Iowa, North Carolina, and Maine and win the vice presidency. They lose in Alabama. So that would end a 6-year reign of control that the Republicans have enjoyed in the Senate. So thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to come out with another presidential forecast video pretty soon. And be sure to subscribe to the channel, comment down any suggestions you may have for a video below, and I will be sure to consider them and make a video that you asked for. So thanks so much for watching. 118 days to go now. See you in November.